Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to IndieCast, where we have a lot of conversations about policy, history, and we do a little bit of storytelling also, and we talk about international relations and everything. Today, my brother, who is my usual partner in this venture, is handling the tech behind the camera and he's assisting us in this episode. So thanks, Jay. And today the special guest is the main brains behind this venture that we do, and she's the architect of this venture and the producer and everything of this venture. A talented author, a talented interior designer, and my own mother. So hello, Dr. Jyoti Singh. Welcome to our latest feature. And before you start talking, I'll just give a brief intro also. Today, we are just going to be speaking about the town of Makluski Ganj. And hold on, it's before it gets interesting, before you realize why are we talking about a town in Jharkhand. But it's not just a story about the town, it's a story about history. It's a story of history that we often neglect. It's a story of how we do town and country planning in India. It's a story of the legacy of the last of the remaining Europeans or the Anglo Indians who settled in India, and what remains of them in terms of public consciousness, architecture, etc. My mom, I invited on this episode just not because she is the main brains and producer of our little venture, but also because she is very, very qualified to speak on this subject. Mom was born in Giridih in Jharkhand. She spent her pretty much her entire elementary childhood in Jharkhand, and has spent a lot of her summer vacations as a child in Makluski Ganj. Then she has watched that place turn into a Naxalite infested area, and then she also now leads some efforts to write about those places on social media, etc. So, Ma, let's get your brief thought about the history and the area that is Makluski Ganj.
So, Makluski Ganj came into being. It's basically a hard work of this guy called Ernest Timothy McCluskey. He was an Anglo Indian and he had a very successful real estate business in Calcutta. When India was drawing towards its independence, the Anglo Indians were suffering from some kind of insecurity because they were the favored and loyal blue eyed boys of the British. And because of the white blood in them, they could not really ever get down to accepting themselves as fully Indians. So when independence was coming close, the sense of insecurity really became very, very high in them. So Mr. McCluskey, on whom his name has been given to this little township called McCluskey Ganj, he went to the king of Ratu. King of Ratu was a very illustrious king who had a small kingdom called Ratu in Jharkhand, and he bought around 10,000 acres of land from the king. Now, that piece of land was and still is one of the most beautiful and scenic piece of land that I've ever seen. It has, undulating green fields, small hillocks, streams here and there, and it's a very beautiful place. So, McCluskey, because of the scenic beauty, without giving a second thought, decided to create his mulk. It's basically a derivation of mulk. They used to call their homeland, their dream homeland as mulk. He decided to, convert that 10,000 acres of land into the dreamland or the homeland for the Anglo Indians who were actually planning to settle back in India after the British left. So, this is the small history of Makluski Ganj and how it came into being. But I'm told almost 400 Anglo Indian families, they invested each and every penny of their earning and savings into bringing their
The town into
homeland,
being.
the homeland into basically manifesting their homeland. So they spent whatever they had saved in their entire life into this place called McCluskey Ganj, where they, because he was from the real estate business, so he cut out beautiful plots, and the Anglo Indians who bought those plots made beautiful bungalows with like those quintessential bungalows of our childhood, the colonial bungalows which we have seen, which had kitchen garden, a coop, a cow shed, and servants' quarter, big garages, and a beautiful lawn in the front of the bungalow that they created. So, once upon a time, while the Anglo Indians were still there, it was a dreamland. It was wild and free. People were, I mean, though there were just 400 families, but from what I have read in National Herald, this article probably came out in 1990s or whatever. So I got an old piece of newspaper. In that, they had mentioned that despite being such a close knit colony, there were their schedule was choco block with game hunting, choco block with going to places. Women used to have rum parties. They used to have culinary competitions where they used to showcase their skills. Baptism happening, church being extremely active. So basically, they had an extremely colorful, wild, and free life in McCluskey Ganj, not even close to what the McCluskey Ganj of today looks like. So this is the brief history, and
Yeah, I think what started happening was that a core issue in the setting up of that place was that I think the Anglo Indians at the time felt isolated by both communities. They felt isolated by the colonial masters who were leaving, and they felt isolated by the Indians themselves. So the Anglo Indians in some ways probably wanted to create a new space out of like their land holding or whatever, because you don't really check either of the boxes. When you're Anglo Indian, you're not really British, you're not really Indian. So there was maybe an issue of identity and acceptance that they were facing. There was a crisis maybe there. So what's your thought
partly
on that?
both of it, because I don't think they had this privilege. The Anglo Indians had the privilege of labeled as the loyal ones by the British. So I can agree that they felt a little affronted because there was no plan for their departure from India. They had to
Yeah.
stay back. At the same time, they were not accepting of integrating a culture that probably they could never ever identify as much with. It's not in toto that I'm talking about the entire community. I'm
Yeah.
talking about most of them.
Yeah,
So
fair.
they were white enough to not accept the Indian culture, Indian gods, Indian mannerism,
But they
Indian
weren't white enough to be
to
able to
be
leave with
yeah.
them.
So they
Or
wanted to create a mini London in India, which was a replica of their counterparts who were white and who were leaving them behind and going away to London. So they wanted to live like white men in India. So you can call it a little bit of a privileged apartheid, if that can be a word that can be used. They were
for sure.
willing outcasts who were very obdurate, and they planned the entire township with exclusion on mind, which eventually led to
The
the
decline.
decline of
Yeah.
McCluskey Gun.
Anyway, back to the point. I think one of the things that we need to recognize is that what started happening maybe a couple of decades after independence was that you realize that there were no employment opportunities and there were no industrial units in that area. There were no major educational institutions in that area at the time. So I think what started happening was, and this is backed by historical record keeping also, that the families from that area started migrating to the UK naturally because they were Anglo Indian, so they probably had relatives there, or they migrated to Australia. So they sold their lands to wealthy Indian families, typically from Calcutta. So what started happening was that there was a substitution, maybe couple of decades after independence that the original allottees of land in McCluskey Ganj started giving up their lands to families from Calcutta, and they, on the money they were able to gather from selling those plots and all, they migrated to the UK, they migrated to Australia. Many of them migrated to other Indian cities also. It's not like the Anglo-Indian community totally became downtrodden, or I'm nobody to speak on their behalf, but like for example, till the last Lok Sabha, we used to have 2 seats reserved for Anglo-Indians in the Lok Sabha. So, maybe they accepted roles in business in other parts of India, right? So, I guess that was one learning, that you cannot sustain a township on nostalgia alone, and you cannot sustain a township
And
on exclusivity alone.
Yeah,
You have to integrate it with some supply chain, industry, some kind of educational institution for it to be a sustainable setup.
Interestingly, I was reading somewhere that there was nothing that could have sustained their livelihood. Agriculture was the only thing they could have done, but this community was very cushy in nature.
Thank you, sir.
They
Thank you.
liked you know cushy jobs where they hated the idea of going and toiling in the fields to do agriculture. That was the only thing that practically they could have done for their survival, for which they were too fragile to do any of it.
I'll disagree here, Ma, but you can finish your point.
No, this is what
Okay.
I read somewhere.
I'll differ because I think the lack of employment opportunities in independent India in that area is also partly the fault of the government of India. We've also, by the way, this is another way we can pivot to our episode on Bihar politics and Bihar's economy that we did with Anandveer Sinha. We'll link it in the description. But my point is that Bihar at the time, and McCluskey Ganj was in independent India for a very long time part of Bihar, because Jharkhand was carved out fairly recently. So the politics and economy of Bihar was also resultant of a lot of state failure with respect to being able to monetize the resources that the area held. Jharkhand was one of the most mineral rich states. It was very rich in terms of natural resources, and I think if the state planning was better, if maybe we did not let the government do all heavy lifting or heavy industrialization, we would have been able to integrate some industry. So I think I'm a little critical of the initial
We are talking
heavy
about
planning model.
by 1960, McCluskeyganj was totally routed, and it had become the state that it is in. So in 1947 is the time that India got independence.
So I mean, there is a 13-year interregnum where some
13
policy
years
changes could have
integral
been made.
that time frame is not really enough for a back and beyond like McCluskeyganj to actually come in the focus of anybody who is into policy making, planning, and looking for job alternatives. So I don't blame anybody here. They could have been a little more patient. They could have because I still feel that the kind of clout and money that the Anglo Indians enjoyed, they could have demanded something for themselves, but the impatience on their part and the lack of will to probably go and negotiate with the new set of rulers was something that I feel was also one of the main reasons that decided to leave India and go.
That's a fair position. I will still push back on this and say that you must have legislatures and governments and judiciaries which in some ways reward your patience. So I think
But
that
they didn't show any patience. Now by 1955, you know how many
so
families.
this is like what chicken came or the egg came first, because if you think that if I so for example you can relate this into any migration question. Why are so many Indians migrating to Dubai? They should also show patience with India's future, right? But many people still leave.
So not everybody has left. From McCluskeyganj, everybody left. Barring 4 families out of 400,
वो तो
everybody
क्योंकि
left.
the township was also small, but
But it was enough for the 400 people now who were staying there already.
Okay.
So you cannot really generalize everything with economy. Indians are emotional people, and we have a very huge many of the time many decisions are made out of emotions.
Okay.
So I feel okay. I agree. I do believe that there was nothing to sustain their livelihood. except for agriculture, which they were not willing to do. Apart from that, they also started. They did not want to get so inclusive in the whole society that they were not willing to
Yeah.
let go of their uniqueness,
Yeah.
because while the British were there, they were still given access to those elite clubs which probably any brown was not allowed
Fair,
to
fair.
enter. They were given, there was this reservation for them in government services. So these very few privileges that came their way was also enough for them to have thought that they were cut above the rest, and they were not willing to actually hobnob with the people who they thought were indirectly, vicariously bosses of,
Okay.
because of their great grandfather, father, mother, whoever was of white
Fair.
blood.
Okay, I agree with you here. I just wanted to bring this back. My focus comes back to why what happened to McCluskey Ganj is not an isolated story. Because, okay, now I might be speaking from a position where I have privilege of hindsight. But I think in the 50s, 60s, the government institutions in India with those planning heavy industry models, it became the tip of the spear attacking any kind of private enterprise. And I think that cut out any incentive for people to develop economic resources in that area. And I'm not just talking about Jharkhand or Makluski Ganj. This is a tragedy that has affected what is present day Bihar also. That, there was a policy vacuum that hurt the area so significantly that to this day, a successful Bihari is somebody who has gotten a respectable job, maybe from the government service or maybe from IIT, IIM or something, or left the state. That is a successful Bihari, because a successful working Bihari will very likely try to not be there. And even the ones who are employed in blue collar jobs, I don't want to use the term quote unquote menial, but maybe in blue collar or gig industry, are also employed in areas like Gurgaon, Hyderabad. So there is an almost exodus of the youth or the unemployable, because the state resources of Bihar and Jharkhand were never identified and never deployed by the union government in those days. That is to the discredit of whichever prime minister or whichever finance minister or chief economic advisor you want to blame. But there were some miscalculations then. The suffering is manifesting in the way that people in Bihar live today. Bihar is much worse in terms of poverty. Jharkhand is actually a little better now. So, having deviated a little bit,
It's
let's just come back to
70,
the issue.
75. I don't know for how long we've been independent now, but 70 plus years, Makluskiganj is in the limbo. It's the same time warp as it was when Timothy McCluskey created it. And
Which
somehow,
means that it's decayed.
it's decayed. It's totally decayed. Interestingly, my father, when he invested in Makluski Ganj, we have a 7 acre, we have one of the most beautiful bungalows made by the Anglo Indians, as which we called ours, because my father in 1987 bought that piece of land. Now that's called the Lal Bangla. That Lal Bangla used to be, when we bought it, it still was a beautiful piece of well, it architecturally a beautiful building. And the original makers, probably in late 90s, came to visit the Lal Bangla also, and they were very very happy to see that it was preserved well. But now, after I lost my father, my mother had to leave Jharkhand, and she was generally dividing her time between four of us. That Lal Bangla fell to total decay and total neglect. Now, if you go to that place, your heart will cry and weep. So my father, who is an extremely wise man, I would really call him very wise. He long ago, despite investing in Makluski Ganj, had said, this is a jinxed area. Nobody could nobody could settle here. It could never become a thriving settlement, despite having all the resources and all the beauties being at place. We would ask him why. He would say, first, the Anglo Indians ran away from there. Then some Bengali gentlemen, Bengali businessmen, they invested there. They they left the place and they went away. Then some army men and some coal India men also invested there. They also left the place and went away. Till date, if there's only thing which talks of some activity in life apart from a thriving Adivasi community of Jharkhand which lives there, is a Don Bosco school.
Okay.
Don Bosco School is the only place which is reflective of some constant economy, and Don Bosco was made there because probably one of the fathers had some links to some Anglo-Indian blood long ago, and
Okay.
it needs
But
to be
okay.
verified. But this is what I heard. So it was his love for McCluskey Ganj that Don Bosco School was
Okay.
open there.
At least there is a thriving school there.
Yeah,
So
very
it's
popular
not
school.
like the township totally failed in its own way.
In fact, they were so secular, so forward looking that when you enter Makluskiganj, you see a temple, a mosque, a gurudwara, all three in the same
In this, and
campus.
that's a very
Because,
popular site in
yeah, in
Makluskiganj.
Makluskiganj. That was probably because Anglo Indians had mixed lineage. So
Yeah.
the Indian ancestors could have been anybody. So
Yeah.
the worship point had a temple and a gurdwara
Gurudwara
and,
and a
and a
church.
mosque
Yeah.
and a mosque and a church.
Yeah.
church. Sorry, not gurdwara, a mosque and a
A
church
mosque,
and a temple.
right? Yeah.
And a temple. ये था वहाँ का. हाँ.
See, actually, I think another thing that needs to be looked at over here is that we started thinking that a lot of the people started investing in those areas from urban India. Like, say, you said officers from Coal India, some army officers. So I think this is the policy problem in India also with absentee landlordism, that its land becomes very difficult to manage, or absentee land ownership for a better term. So you are at threat with encroachments, you are at threat with even disputes arising sometimes with government organizations also, and then you are also at threat of getting into legal disputes because of unclear land records, unclear titling. And I think at this point the average upper middle class or even middle class family which is salaried and has invested in a piece of land, they will start thinking that it's just much better for me to get out of this hassle. I have zero financial incentive to protect that hut or that house. I have zero financial incentive to protect heritage. The fact that there is no financial incentive to protect heritage has not just been seen in Makluski Ganj in Jharkhand, it's been seen in so many monuments within Delhi which got encroached with the passage of time and the growth of the city. It's the lack of financial incentive or political will to promote or preserve any kind of heritage is so painfully visible in Calcutta itself. So many old structures with, no matter which ideology they belong to, they were beautifully made structures, and at least the state apparatus could have ensured some revitalization of those buildings, homes, schools, even massive secretariat buildings in Calcutta. They might look beautiful from the outside, but they are at best like they're like big overgrown slums, for the lack of a better word, despite beautiful architecture. So to the discredit of state and town and country planning, we don't promote any kind of heritage preservation. You almost let old projects and old monuments die down, decay away, because until and unless some big foundation comes and start, uh, you know, preserving its heritage, why does anyone have that incentive? So I think this is something we could look at
But
changing.
how will government look after privately owned property? And they're not, after all, called heritage building, or they have not really been identified as heritage site.
See, government can just enable a right kind of
Here,
environment
yeah,
for.
I'll agree to this point because the land law and the transfer of land to a non Anglo Indian has been so ambiguous and so complicated that despite people owning the land for 30, 40 years now, may not have a registration and
Yeah,
mutation in
and
their
this
name.
is not. This is again not an isolated McCluskey Ganj
Yeah,
issue.
yeah, yeah.
This happens everywhere.
There's corruption.
Yeah.
There's so much of rampant corruption that I was told to get a registry done. per acre you had to pay something to the tune of 30 lakhs or something like that. So that deterred us. The price of that land was also not that much
Yeah.
that we could have paid
So
that much of
exactly,
registry.
you've proved my point that there are no
Yeah,
financial incentives
it's
to
not
act
financial.
and
It is such a complicated land, land related rules and regulation that it makes it all so difficult for anybody who has good intention. Like, I love McCluskey so much that I would like to create a little oasis for people who just want to go back and see the place and enjoy the wilderness in its complete glory. You
yeah,
know, it's so beautiful. But how do I do that? They
yeah,
don't give me my land, they don't register it because it's not getting registered. Mutation is an issue. If is an issue, I don't get the loan from the bank. So everything gets complicated, and people like us who really want to hold on to that land parcel, we are made to leave the place and look for a buyer, and we want to make a
yeah.
easy exit from that
Yeah,
place.
so exactly. I mean, if hypothetically it could have been a beautiful, by the way, it's a beautiful hill destination. If the regulatory environment was better, it could have served as a good weekend getaway for for the working population of Ranchi to go every weekend, and maybe some hotel groups and hospitality chains could have invested there. This could have only been done if the regulatory environment allows it, if the red tape is not that it doesn't choke people out so easily. You know, it's like this concept of crowding out, that you effectively, with poor policy making and red tapeism, you crowd out any potential to do business. And that happened especially in the case of Bihar. Very tragically, in the case of Bihar, again, McCluskeyganj was a part of Bihar till very recently. Happened in West Bengal, which is why the potential that cities like Calcutta had, they are crumbling under it. And places like Calcutta also, the youth majority, the educated youth leaves to different urban centers within India or prefers to migrate abroad. So that is the tragedy of poor policy making that we are living in. This also brings me back to the one point that our heritage, our preservation of monuments, the way we will be able to do environmental conservation are all in one way or another intimately tied to the way we do land usage and town and country planning. If town and country planning departments allow you to pay a certain bribe and cut off some trees here and there, I'm sorry, you are not going to conserve any environmental diversity. Your laws are only as good as their implementation, and if they aren't well thought out implementations, then it's just red tape. I'm sorry. So I'll bring go
In
back to
1932, some jungle law was passed stating that certain portion would be declared jungle law. The only jungle in Makluskiganj is probably made by the recent buyers. So
right.
my plot, which comes under the jungle land, and that was the pretext on which the registrar did not really register our plot. He said कि आपकी ज़मीन तो जंगल लैंड में आती है. हम बोले जंगल है कहाँ वहाँ पे? तो बोलते हैं नो, वी गो बाय द 1932 law
Yeah.
of jungle, of jungle land, and your property is in jungle. हम बोले
Yeah.
we have 36 mango trees all planted by
Yeah,
my mother.
and this is also, in fact, I think there was a recent Supreme Court ruling which I will have to check, which basically states that for anything to be qualified as a forest under the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972, it has to be like any dictionary definition of a forest. So you plant some trees in a certain area, and if they start looking like a forest by the Supreme Court direction, they can be considered a forest, and they are entitled to
They're
that
beautiful green fields.
that kind of
It's a
protection.
beautiful place, but I'm sorry you can't, by any stretch of imagination or description, call it a jungle or a
Yeah,
forest
and
land.
so my problem with this is that the district administrations are not keeping up with any direction that the judiciary gives. The judiciary is also, we know the state of the judiciary with respect to declaring cases and adjudicating matters which are based on land. So at least land disputes don't get solved in India. Like the judiciary does very little. So there's to the discredit of the judiciary of India, the malay lies greatly with them also. That any kind of land dispute will never find its real solution in the judiciary, and by the time
every new date, every new policy that is announced, the passage of time is also happening. So, quote unquote, your heritage property or even some jungle or forest area that you want to maintain, it will start decaying. People will start losing interest. People will start losing hope. One thing a judiciary and a district administration that can ignore you over and over will, the signal that is told sent to you is that your voice will not matter, so your initiative doesn't matter. So the right thing for you to do is sell everything, lose hope, and then just go back to an urban
That's what
scape.
probably the sharks are waiting for. That you do a distress sell, they lap it up, and you leave the place because you're disgruntled. You don't have the same kind of prowess and power to exert any kind of influence there. So
Yeah,
probably there are a lot of beneficiaries here
yeah.
who work behind the scene clandestinely to ensure that the legal and the legal heirs, they
Yeah.
leave the place and go away.
Yeah, and I mean,
So
this is not even to mention the left-wing extremist problem that used to exist in that area. Like Bihar saw the worst of Naxalism in India, Jharkhand too, and that led to so much violence against people who even owned like a very small plot of land. So why would there be any incentive for a person to preserve heritage in a political climate where even land ownership was getting you killed? And this is to the great discredit of the political leadership in Bihar in those days. And I feel like then that's a story of state failure. It's a story of failure of judiciary also.
So when the Naxalites were ruling the roost, when now they have been wiped out, and the company, not the company, the a little entity which was made to fight it, they have become the de facto Naxals now. But anyway, this is apart from that. So when Nani used to live there, when she had not really moved with us,
The context, my grandmother has actually spent a decent amount of time
in
in this
McCluskey.
town.
So Nani, one day in a summer night, she heard knocking on the Lal Bangla. She opened to realize there were four men standing outside in midst of the night. Nani, being the gutsy woman that she was, she said, "Yes, bataiye aap log kaun hai?" So he said, "I've heard that you've got a pistol on you." So, and because you're very respected here because of your husband and your guts, we won't do anything to you if you give us the gun. Because they were not looking for gold, silver, money, or anything. They were just collecting arms and armaments from whoever they could lay their hands on. But Nani didn't have anything. So Nani had gotten 4 gold bangles for all the 4 daughters. She gave it to them and she said, "You take it with you." So this is
Right.
something that is the closest brush we had with the Naxalism there.
That's a very interesting story. And
And
it's
a few other things about McCluskey, which has a nostalgia. Uh, it's more of it has nostalgia value more than anything else. So basically, in 1989, one movie or it was a Doordarshan serial, which was called Queenie. Queenie was a story of an Anglo Indian who migrated to Australia without leaving a trace behind that she had brown blood in her. She migrated to Australia. She became a big star. She became such a big star that people were looking to, all her detractors were looking to, look for a reason so that she could be dethroned. She was the ruling star of Australia in 60s or maybe 50s. It's a fiction, so I really don't know. But I'm told that it was based on real life. So people who wanted to bring her down, they started doing a deep history research on her life. And one of the things that they thought they could really, uh, bring some kind of ignominy on her was by disclosing the fact that she had brown blood in it. So Queenie, who was in the top of her career, probably migrated to US because she did not want that shameful lineage to come to fore. So that is the kind of aversion some of the Anglo Indians also had towards their legacy of brown blood in them. And as of today, I think that lady died last year, whatever. There was this Kitty Mem Saab. Kitty Mem Saab was perfect example of an Anglo-Indian cocking a snook at Mr. McCluskey. She stood for everything that Mr. McCluskey stood against for. Kitty was a feral Anglo-Indian, very very feisty. She didn't give a hoot, to her privileged lineage. In fact, she used to laugh at people who used to come and mull over her. She became some kind of a star or some kind of a zoo animal in the zoo. People used to come from far and near and far to just have buy her chai or this vegetable that she would be selling at the Magluskiganj railway station. So she could not give a dime to her privileged background because for her survival was so important. Kitty's family was one of the few families who could not migrate to anywhere else because her parents had invested whatever they had in Makluskigan with very little left and no buyer around to go back to wherever they could. So Kitty ended up growing up like Adivasis, looking after the goat. She used to sell, with impeccable English, she used to sell vegetables at Makluskiganj railway station. And so a lot of Bengali authors, writers and scribes used to go there and come back romanticizing what her life would have been if she had migrated. But Kitty couldn't have
Cared
anything
less.
because she ended up marrying an Adivasi, had two children from that Adivasi husband of hers. And one of the co-invested invested in Makluski, and this is very interesting. That's why I'm telling you. He went to call on Kitty just because he was really in awe of what this woman was all about. So he reached Kitty's house only to see her sitting at the doorstep of the bungalow made by her father and mother, which was in shambles, but still it was there. I'm talking about early 2000s. So Kitty was nursing a injured goat. She saw him and she knew that he's another, curiosity seeker who's come there probably to understand what she's all about. So she looked at him with that quizzical frown on her face. So he just bowed and he said, "No, I've not come here to ask you anything. I'm your neighbor. So I've just come to make friends with you because I'm going to settle down next to you." So he says the only stark Anglo-Indian-ness that was still left in Kitty was the fact she took him to the drawing room, which was actually a library full of books that her mother had bought for her. They had classics like Shakespeare and Wordsworth, and insisted that she'll serve him tea in the last piece of china that she had inherited from her mother,
parents.
on a table which had hand embroidered tablecloth, which was again probably what she had done as a child that her mother had taught her, or maybe one of the inheritance from the mother. So Kitty, eventually, if you look at it, ironically, one person who stayed back in Makluski Ganj stood for everything that Ernest Makluski didn't want to stand for.
Fair. That's well put, and that's a very powerful story right there, because somebody like that always had her eye on the job and the economics of living day to day. She couldn't care about race and culture as much. So there's in its own way, it's an inspiring figure.
The best part is she used to also brew liquor. So
Yeah, that I've heard.
desi tharra she used
Some
to
Indian
make it.
alcohol. Yeah,
Yeah, she used to make desi alcohol. If she was that was her side hustle, as you guys call
Yeah.
it. She used to make it, and when people used to snicker at her, she used to say, "Why certain Margaret, for another one who left, another Anglo-Indian who stayed back, she would say she does it stylishly. You have no problem with that, but just because I make a desi daru, you
problem
raise
with
you
that.
have problem with that." So anyway, it's
So,
very interesting, and I wish I can unearth many more stories
yeah.
related to Makluski Ganj, because it was a very romantic land. It had horses, stables, love stories, gossip, bitchy sessions, warring families, you name it, and it had all the masalas to kind of have a very interesting existence there.
Yeah. So I think we've had an interesting conversation about the romanticism and the history of that area brought to you by mom, and the policy failures and the economics of that area that I like to highlight, because I'm somebody who holds a decent amount of cynicism to the way we preserve any kind of heritage, whether it is religious heritage, cultural heritage, and one of the things that I passionately feel about is that we need to start investing more monetarily and physically into preservation of heritage and looking for ways to monetize their existence even in today's day, and that can solve two problems at one: a the problem of a preserving heritage, and b generating jobs in the process.
And
Maybe I'm
generally
being idealistic here.
ease out the land related
Yeah,
laws of the country.
yeah,
They
I
have,
mean, that's a very uphill battle.
yeah, very uphill, but it's time that somebody
Yeah,
did something
something
about
has
it.
to be done about land records and their clarity in titling
Yeah, the
the.
ownership
Yeah,
rights, and I may be an owner yet I'm not being able to get the registration done. That is so frustrating. So these things should be taken care of. They should be, I mean, the policy maker, the rule maker, the executive, whoever it is, they should, take cognizance of all of it and ensure that the people who are at least the rightful heir, they get the ownership of the land.
yeah.
This is something so basic anybody is asking for.
And I think on that note, we can conclude our conversation for today. Thank you so much for joining us. Sorry, good night.
Good night. Good night.